Have you ever noticed that the things that matter the most are the things that you don't have time for? The gym, your business, a side project, something you've been talking about doing for years. But if you keep telling yourself that you have a time problem, you might just end up spending the next 5 years stuck exactly where you are. Because what if time isn't actually the thing that's getting in your way? Over the years, every time that I said I don't have time, my assumption was that, in fact, I did not have the time. But when I actually started pulling on that thread, I realized that time wasn't actually the problem. And what I was actually doing was using the excuse of a lack of time for completely different problems. So if you've been feeling like you don't have time, you should keep listening because it might just explain why you've been stuck for longer than you'd like. Because the thing is, when people usually say that they don't have the time, they are often talking about one of four completely different issues. And the thing is, each one of these issues demands a different solution. And the fourth one is probably the one that I see entrepreneurs struggle with the most often. And I want you to pay attention so you can figure out which one actually sounds more like your situation. Because if you've been trying to solve the wrong problem, you can spend years wondering why nothing is moving forward. So let's start with the first one. And this one trips up a lot of people. So what if you actually do have the time, but what you haven't done is made the required trade-off? One of the things often mistaken for I don't have enough time is a lack of trade-off. So what do I mean by that? Every new goal that you have competes with something that is already occupying your life. Going to the gym might compete with having a lay-in because you had a late night last night. Starting a new business might be competing with Netflix or cleaning the house. There's often this misconception that you'll somehow get around to the goal when your life begins being less busy. But I don't know about you, for most people, life doesn't just start becoming less busy. But people often look at their existing schedule and their existing life and wonder, where am I supposed to fit all this new stuff in? And when there's no obvious gap, people just assume that they don't have the time. But really, the actual problem is that nothing has moved to make room for it. Because it's not about magically finding this gap. It's about creating room for it. You have to create the gap. So what this usually boils down to isn't that your schedule is just too full. You're likely avoiding making the decision of what you're going to be doing less of. There's this saying, show me your calendar and I'll show you what your priorities are. And whilst it sounds simplistic, I think there's a lot of truth there. Because when you are trying to build a new life or you're trying to create a new version of yourself, it rarely happens by keeping everything the same. Something normally has to move or just lose its place. So you may not need to find more time. It may be about deciding what stops getting your time. That's why we struggle to fit new goals into our old lives. So ask yourself, what keeps beating this new goal in competition for my time? Is it scrolling on social media? Is it taking random calls throughout the day? Or maybe you're working on things that are no longer relevant to where you're trying to go. So stop asking yourself, how do I fit this in? And instead think to yourself, what needs to move so I can make room for this? Because ultimately, you're not finding time for creating a new life. You're taking away time from the old one. You need to make this trade-off. But the thing is, not everybody is actually dealing with this trade-off problem, because sometimes you've already made this time available to do whatever it is you need to do for this new goal or to build this new life. But you still find yourself not doing the thing. Which brings me to the second point that people often mistake for not having time. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself saying that you don't have time to do the thing that you need to do, but somehow you find the time to do these emails, you find the time to do admin, you find the time to start clearing out a spare bedroom in your house, a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't going to actually move the needle forward? So when you're doing this, what you're probably doing is avoiding the thing that you need to do because it's either difficult or really out of your comfort zone. So you keep just pushing it down to the bottom of the list and replacing that time with things that you don't even need to be doing. And in situations like this, you're not short on the time, you are just short on your tolerance for the task that you need to actually do. So you find yourself spending 3 hours on other things that are not relevant because the thing that you're meant to be doing is perceived to be difficult by you. So things like making sales calls, reaching out to people that you haven't reached out to before, all of these things feel harder to you. So you avoid them. I know I've done that one a lot in the past, and I remember feeling like I was just so busy. But when I actually looked at what I was doing, I was spending a whole bunch of time on things that I had no business doing at that time. Now, this third thing that people often mistake for not having enough time is really interesting to me. And it's where you actually sit down with the thing that you need to do. You have the time for it. You're not avoiding it. So you've made the trade-off. You're not replacing it with things that are easier to do. But somehow the day just ends up disappearing. And this is where the conversation moves away from time management and over to something that people rarely really talk about. And that is attention management, managing where your attention goes throughout the day, because it's your attention that often determines your results. And when you're in that situation where you're sitting down to do something, you've made the time for it, but the day just flies by and you're just thinking, what's going on? I don't have enough time to do this stuff. What might be happening is that you do not have enough uninterrupted attention. Like when you sit down for 2 hours and by the end of it, you look at what you've done and it's not much. But if you really dig down into what you've been doing every 5 to 10 minutes, what you're probably doing is focusing on the thing that you need to do, but then switching to replying to an email, and then switching to replying to a message, and then switching to answering a phone call. And then it feels like suddenly your time has slipped away and you haven't achieved anything. But then other times you have much less time, like 30 minutes, but you've got focused attention there, and you end up moving the needle more than you did in those 2 hours. So what's happening when your time is slipping away is often that you are taking 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there to do all these different things. But these micro segments end up just derailing your entire day. So you end up feeling exhausted and mentally scattered because every time you switch a task, part of your attention stays on that previous thing. So in effect, your attention is being left behind in these small little pockets. And these are really random things that you're leaving your attention behind in. So what you're calling a time shortage is often just an attention leak. Now, this fourth one is one that I see really often, and it's definitely one that I've had a lot of challenges with in the past. I find that people often confuse having a lack of time with having a lack of energy. So let me explain. Somebody might have 2 hours of free time after work, but the energy to do the thing that you need to do in those 2 hours after work is almost non-existent. So if you think about it, that 2 hour block in the morning does not have the same value as the 2 hours after you've done a long day of work. Every hour block doesn't have the same juice as another. 1 hour when you're fresh-minded can often give you more results than 3 hours when you just feel a bit drained. So I don't have the time often becomes this blanket explanation for these 4 very different problems that you might have. So if you find yourself thinking or feeling, I don't have the time, try and figure out what the actual problem is, because you might just need to make a trade-off, or you might be avoiding something, or your attention might be all over the place. And sometimes simply you just do not have energy left in the tank. But in order to actually get past this, you need to identify which one of those problems you really have and solve those, because it's usually one of those 4 things dressed up in you just feeling like you don't have the time.